Hi, everybody. Good morning. Sorry about the slight delay. Despite the fact that we're in a studio, I am technically challenged, and I feel that my presence causes technical issues. So I'm Angie Rasmussen. I am here for the Save America movement. I'm on the steering committee. I'm here with one of our members of our science committee, Jessica Malaty. Exciting Surgeon General nomination hearing that is about to occur at the Health, Education, Labor, and Pension Committee at the U.S. Senate. That's going to get kicked off in about a half hour here. And in the meantime, to get ready for that, Jessica and I decided that we wanted to pregame because probably a lot of people watching this don't actually know who the Surgeon General nominee is. They don't actually, maybe they don't even know what the Surgeon General actually does or what you have to actually do to be qualified to become the Surgeon General. These are actually really important questions. So we're just going to dive into this today and talk about some of the issues. One of the reasons I think this is so important, and I'm about to go to Jessica for her perspective on this, but one of the reasons I think that this is so important is what is happening in the federal government right now affects all of our healthcare. But a big part of it is the fact that all of the people who are in our federal government right now are actually very incompetent at their job. So they're the perfect people that you would want to install in the federal government if you don't want the federal government to get anything done, and if you actually would like to destroy the federal government. And that is essentially what Casey Means is. So Casey Means is an ear, nose, and throat surgeon in training who dropped out right before she completed her residency to become an Instagram wellness influencer. Later, she started a company that provides continuous blood glucose monitors to people who don't need them. That was founded with $20 million in seed money from Mark Andreessen and his venture capital firm in the Bay Area, which I know Jess also might be able to share some insights on because she, in fact, lives in San Francisco. So there is a lot of money behind Casey Means. Unfortunately, Casey Means has not actually practiced medicine in quite a long time, and she never completed her training. Now she does something called functional medicine, which is essentially taking a lot of measurements to cure diseases that don't exist and not really doing anything about it. I am going to be quiet now, however, because there are a lot of other issues with Casey Means. She has a lot of really crackpot ideas about food, about hormones, about reproduction, about vaccines for sure. And so we're going to dig into all of that so that you are ready to nail this woman, basically, when she gets in front of the Senate Health Committee, because the number one objective I have today is to discourage the senators from advancing her out of the Health Committee to a full confirmation vote with the Senate. What do you think, Jess?
Well, I hope you can hear me because I just got a notification that my network is shaky, and I apologize for that. But actually, what I wanted to talk about real quick was what you mentioned on the qualifications, because this is a very big issue that a lot of us have had. This is not just oh, we don't like her. The Surgeon General of the United States is a extremely important position. It is considered the highest role in public health. It is the operational head of the United States Public Health Service Commissioned Corp, which is essentially like the Foreign Service, but for public health. They can be deployed in the US, they can be deployed overseas. It is a federal position. It has historically always been filled by a licensed physician, although it's not technically required. It is outside of the norm that she is not a licensed board certified provider. And I think that precedent matters. I think that requirements and qualifications that are legitimate matter a lot. And we have seen this administration repeatedly override precedent when it comes to everything from how meetings are run at the ACIP meeting, or even who can be qualified or who can be, sufficient to fill extremely consequential roles in the US public health infrastructure. I mean, RFK Jr. is a perfect example of that. He's a lawyer with no public health background, but just very wrong and strong opinions about public health. And he is the head of the Health and Human Services Agency. And so this is another example of the MAHA movement and the MAHA administration just bypassing scientific precedent, scientific structure that we've had in order to protect these very pivotal programs in our country.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that's been happening throughout the federal government. And of course, because of our jobs and our professions, we tend to pay the closest attention to HHS. But this problem of depletion of really key staff has been happening throughout the entire federal government. What's really alarming about this within the HHS department is that you really kind of can't replace experts in these departments with people who don't know what they're doing, because if you fuck up in public health, people actually die. And this is one of those problems. Now, people do make mistakes. You know, we get into this with all of these conversations about trust, which is actually something that Casey Means loves to talk about. She loves to say that during the pandemic, conventional medicine and public health lost trust. And that's why nobody wants to get vaccines anymore. That's why everybody's into, quote, eat real food. It's because they don't trust us anymore. And that's just simply not true. The fact is, people did trust us before. And in fact, people still do trust in science. I mean, the polling data, even recently, shows that the vast majority of people still support vaccination for their children, still think that it's a good idea. And that's really encouraging to hear in these dark times sometimes. But, this is a persistent problem where the government actually is unable to carry out many of its normal functions because so many people have just been riffed. They've been forcibly retired, or they've been encouraged to retire. They've quit. They've left government service for a variety of different reasons, mostly because of the rise of fascism. And they haven't been replaced. And the ones that have been replaced with people like this. Either that, right, or they think so little of the importance of public health that they'll actually have one person doing multiple really important jobs. And the most recent example of that is NIH Director Jay Bhattacharya, who was just appointed acting director of the CDC. So now Jay Bhattacharya, who is a health economist, who went to medical school, never even did a residency or an internship, has never seen a patient, treated a patient in his life, and sat in an office at the Stanford Hoover Institute basically for his entire career, is now in charge of all of our nation's biomedical research. And now he's also in charge of all of our public health responses. And he has zero experience in public health. He is technically an epidemiologist, but he is not the kind of person that you would want responding to an outbreak. Probably because he'd be like, hey, everybody, do high risk behavior so that we can all get the outbreak. Because that's pretty much what he said about the COVID pandemic. That was his strategy for managing that. But there's a lot of people like that in the government.
That's right. I was looking on the CDC Data Project website earlier this morning and noticed that since January of 2025, directors for 20 out of 25 CDC centers have either been resigned or forced out. That's 80% of leadership in these public health offices are either gone or forcibly gone. And when we talk about trust, and I'll get really hot about this topic because I'm researching health. I'm literally doing my dissertation on the topic of trust. The trust is now almost a Trojan horse for junk science and for the MAHA movement to redirect the gaze of the public and say, actually, we're the good guys. Actually, we're the ones asking questions that nobody's asked before, with answers nobody's considered before, except that they're coming to the table with the answers already formed. And that's when all of us who are doing the real science are saying, that's not how you do it. And we're trying to send the alarms to people to say, trust is a very, very precious thing. It is how everything in this country runs. It is how we tie our seatbelts in our cars and turn the ignition on and trust that our car is going to go forward when we press the pedal, right? It is why we decide to eat at restaurants, because we expect and we trust that we will not get food poisoning because they've prepared the food properly. Trust is how this society functions. And I think they've become extremely aware of that and have used it as a way to make the movement sound more palatable or more altruistic than it actually is. The day before the CDC updated the website to say that vaccines don't cause autism is no longer an evidence-based sentence, the About page was updated and the word trust is mentioned 12 times in one page. I pay attention to this stuff because I'm literally tracking it. I'm researching it. And so it is not a benign word in this conversation. I'm actually very willing to count how many times she says the word trust during her confirmation hearing, because it has become the thing that they are using to really hook a lot of people, especially people who weren't even very right-leaning have been hooked into this because of this type of language.
I mean, that's exactly how Casey Means has built her business. So Casey Means has this business, as I mentioned, called Levels, that sells these continuous blood glucose monitors. And these are devices that diabetics wear, type 1 diabetics who will literally die if their blood sugar is too high or too low. And that's why you wear these devices. Casey Means sells them along with a very expensive subscription service to people who are just trying to lose a little bit of weight, or people who might have, some kind of unspecified chronic disease, or they're tired, or they, don't have enough energy. So they go see a company like Levels that can provide them with wellness services. So it's not actually treating any kind of disease. It's supposedly to address these so-called root causes of disease, and essentially sort of stop disease before it comes out. And this is, I think, something that most people don't really think about a lot. And, I'm the co-editor-in-chief of a journal called Vaccine. I work at a vaccine research institute. I think about vaccines all the time. And I never actually really thought about it this way. But this idea that root causes can prevent disease if you only take the right supplements, if you only do the right sort of coaching regimen, if you only do this or that, then you can prevent disease as well as a vaccine could. And that's quite simply untrue. We were just talking about Jay Bhattacharya, the NIH director. This is effectively the HHS strategy for pandemic preparedness, which he has said now multiple times. He said that rather than do virology research, develop countermeasures, vaccines, things like that, you should get out and go for a walk, quit smoking. Mm-hmm. Then you're going to be in much better shape the next time a pandemic comes around. I mean, too bad none of us will have vaccines and a bunch of us will die. But, some of us will probably not get as sick maybe because we were just a little bit healthier.
Yeah. I mean, let's dig into that a little bit too, because she wrote an entire book about this premise called Good Energy, which purports that essentially bad energy is why there is chronic disease, and bad energy meaning mitochondrial dysfunction, metabolic dysfunction. That is coded language for terrain theory. And if you're not familiar with terrain theory is the opposite of germ theory. It is an obsolete theory that suggests that even though germs are everywhere, which is germ theory, right? That the pathogens that make us sick, it's really about how your body is doing in the baseline, right? Whether or not you are healthy, unhealthy, imbalanced, or balanced, have good nutrition, have good sleep, it is a very ableist and very white normative view on how health should be measured and how health standards should be considered. And they're not talking about it in this language because that would be problematic. But we all know what this all sounds like. It sounds like a very, very old and widely debunked theory on how and why people get sick.
Well, and that is actually, to a degree, what I think Robert F. Kennedy Jr. believes, because
100%.
he has made comments on a number of occasions that suggest he doesn't believe in germ theory.
Yeah.
He either believes in terrain theory, as you mentioned. There's also miasma theory, which is that disease is basically caused by ill humors or essentially disease vibes, like in the air. You got disease vibes, and that's how you get this stuff. Casey Means what is different about functional medicine is they try to explain it. So unlike, sort of crystals and the wooey stuff, like in the anti-vax world, functional medicine pretends to be actually very medical and very scientific. They're all about collecting data. You wear a continuous blood glucose monitor, you've got an app, you can pull up graphs for that stuff just like you can with any of your health data if you have an Apple Watch or whatever. That's basically, Apple Watches and Fitbits were the start of functional medicine, essentially. I mean, it started before that, but they are really like this whole wearable thing. The idea is that everybody's going to be collecting all this data about just what's going on from day to day. And somehow all of this information reveals the secret regimen of supplements that you should be taking to stave off cancer in the future. And that's the whole idea behind functional medicine. So it's still a bunch of bullshit. It's still saying that basically you don't need vaccines, you don't need drugs, you don't need conventional medicine, you don't need evidence-based approaches if you just believe in this, because everything is the root cause, everything has a root cause. And, in Casey Means' case, she believes that it is mitochondrial dysfunction. Now, I did my postdoctoral fellowship working on hepatitis C virus, which is an RNA virus in the family Flaviviridae that infects the liver very specifically. The liver, for most people who, it's been a while since you took a physiology class, the liver is where fats get broken down and metabolized. So there's a ton of metabolic activity in hepatocytes, the liver cells that hepatitis C virus infects. When you study hepatitis C virus and when you study the host response to infection, as I do, because that is my research topic, you learn a lot about how mitochondria work. And you know what? During viral infections, a lot of viruses mess around with the mitochondria because there's actually a very important antiviral signaling protein that is located in the outer membrane of the mitochondria. And I know this is getting sciencey, and I know people are not paying attention, and that part is now over. What I was about to demonstrate, though, is that I know a hell of a lot more about mitochondria than Casey Means does. And it is actually quite possible to do a lot of different things to mitochondria because they're essentially, so mitochondria are very interesting. They're the energy powerhouses of the cell. And for those of you who remember back to your middle school biology classes, they make something called ATP or adenosine triphosphate. This is actually the A in DNA, or not the A in DNA, the ATCG that makes up DNA, the 4 nucleotides. Adenosine triphosphate is the A. So when you have 3 phosphates together, it releases energy when you break those bonds. And that's why ATP, which the mitochondria makes, is energy for the cell. It makes a lot of those phosphate bonds that you can break and then release energy. And that's how the cell powers itself. Essentially, this is the cell's internal combustion engine. If you think about it like a car, I have driven some beater cars. My first car was a 1987 Hyundai Excel hatchback that was a 4-speed and had vinyl interior. It was horrible. You could do all kinds of stuff to that car and it would still run. Maybe not very well. Maybe it was embarrassing to drive. Maybe it was scary to drive, but it would still run. What Casey Means is saying is that effectively 93% of all humanity have engines that don't work in our cells.
Yep.
And it's completely broken. And we're just completely screwed unless we hook up to a continuous blood glucose monitor and buy a subscription for her service and buy a subscription for all of her friends' services. And that's what Casey Means is all about. And that's what she's going to do once she's the Surgeon General.
This is what's concerning to me. I've been in science communication for the last 20 years. I am very, very picky about the words that I use and the words that other scientists use to describe the work that they're doing. And I find the word, energy and good energy and bad energy to be very, very intentionally manipulative because what they're trying to do is just dumb down the science, right? Trying to make you seem like this is too complex for you. So I'm going to make it just sound a little bit more woo, a little bit more accessible. But what they're doing is they're actually just doing a huge disservice to everybody. They are duping them into believing that there's this mystery and no allopathic provider or researcher has ever considered it, which is why this idea of root cause keeps coming up and chronic diseases being the North Star of the MAHA movement. And my training is in emerging infectious diseases. We know that emerging infectious diseases are a large driver of chronic diseases. So you have a movement that is so fixated on something that is part of a continuous loop related to germs. And yet we keep looking at good energy, bad energy, how people are feeling on the inside and not thinking about all the things on the outside that could be causing their harm and the emerging things that are going to be adding more harm in the future as we live in this era of more pandemics. And I just feel like as the Surgeon General, whose job is the chief communicator of health in this country, she can't even get her words right. It is deeply problematic, deeply concerning that somebody who is trained in medical science uses such obtuse language to describe very, very real things in biology and in public health.
Well, and that's because she doesn't actually know about them, or if she does, she doesn't care. And this is what I find to be perfectly reprehensible about all of this. I think that people who have trained as scientists, as physicians, They know the consequences of doing this, right? Like, so I'm not a physician. I'm a virologist. I've never touched a patient in my life. The closest I've come is to cutting up a mouse. Um, I do not think about patients' well-beings as part of my normal job, but I do because I also work on vaccines. I work on viruses that kill people. I work on some of the most pathogenic viruses that are out there. And I can't not think about the consequences of getting one of these viruses. And it is unbelievable to me that, this is actually not a very comforting thing that they're selling to people. And that's because if it were a pathogen that was causing your COVID, take Paxlovid, get a vaccine, you'll be less likely to have COVID the next time. Casey Means has said that COVID is inherently a metabolic disease and it should be managed with diet. To manage, no question, nutrition is important for every single infection that you have, whether it's with a virus, a bacteria, or a fungus, whatever. But nutrition is not the end of it. You cannot cure a viral infection with nutrition. You cannot cure measles with vitamin A. You cannot cure COVID with a good diet, with good energy, because there's no such thing as good energy. There's just energy. In fact, it's one of the most fundamental things in science that we know about. The law of conservation of mass and energy is the basis of literally everything in the physical world. So it's really not just anti-science, it's actually anti-existence and anti-reality. What MAHA is selling to people. And increasingly, that's why we're having this conversation. I've become convinced that the battle for public health is really a battle for reality and how people perceive it.
That's right. That's right. I mean, the companies that she has worked with and has profited from are vast, right? So it's not just Levels. She's worked with a number of supplement companies and a number of wellness companies that have made her pockets very, very full of money. It's not even clear to me, Angie, that she has even divested fully from these companies to allow her judgment to be less clouded, because right now she's still very much in the wellness orbit that preaches these things, that teaches these things that are very anti-science, anti-existence. Our Surgeon General, the nation's doctor, cannot have that type of conflict of interest. And so I'm going to be very curious during this hearing when that comes up and how she answers those questions, because we saw, again, RFK Jr., who made tons of money off of being essentially an ambulance chaser for vaccines, just sent his money to his son, right? So it's just a little financial diversion. I'm very curious what it's going to look like for her, because I don't think she's ready to leave the woo-woo functional anti-science, anti-existence. I'm never going to stop saying that. It's so good. World,
I mean, why would you want to? Like, she's a hero in that world, first of all, which, again, I'm trying to be nice, but like, I just cannot abide by her taste in floral patterns. She is embraced by that entire community. And it's always Casey Means is on her way to the farmer's market to like boost up her mitochondria and get some beets or whatever. I mean, if you ever really want to get grossed out, like go check out some of the recipes that come out of Dr. Casey's kitchen, okay? But I'm very curious, along with you, Jess, about this kind of thing, because I think that she's definitely not ready to leave that world. It's very, very lucrative. She and her brother, who I should add, her brother is a senior advisor to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. In the Department of Health and Human Services. He is a former wedding dress entrepreneur who has been characterized professionally by his incompetence throughout his entire career. Now, mostly what he does is gets into people's replies and starts lecturing them about food, usually, or vaccines, that kind of thing. But he runs a company, too, that he is not divested from. It's called TrueMed. And do you know what they do? When Casey recommends that somebody get a continuous blood glucose monitor, Callie's company helps them commit tax fraud with their flexible spending account or health spending account dollars to purchase that, as well as to purchase things like cold plunges, which seem to be all the rage with the Maha crowd these days. No word on if you can pay for the jeans with those tax dollars as well.
You've got to have jeans.
Yeah.
That's the only way to do a sauna or a cold plunge these days.
It's the whole milk too. Whole milk.
Whole raw milk.
Whole raw milk.
Yes, which let's go
Nothing,
ahead and talk
nothing
about
like
that.
drinking some bacteria in, incubator like temperatures in a sauna with Kid Rock. That sounds like a very microbiologically safe idea.
This is a literal quote from Casey Means. She said regarding raw milk that she wants to be free to form a relationship with a farmer, look him in the eyes, pet his cow, and decide if she feels that it's safe to drink the cow's milk.
Is she going to make friends with the Campylobacter jejuni that is also in that cow's milk?
They'll be BFFs.
E. coli 0157H7?
It's just
That's a bad strain of E.
unbelievable to
coli,
me.
guys.
It's unbelievable to me that somebody, again, with a medical degree, even if they're not board certified, would say something this dangerous in a time where people have been sick, have gotten listeria, have gotten salmonella. A child died because of exposure to raw milk. And yet, we're seeing somebody who might have the highest medical position in this country say something like, I just want to get a vibe from from the farmer and get a vibe from the cow himself or herself to see if I can drink their milk.
Yeah, I was going to say, I hope it's herself. um, that would be a bad mistake to make. But
Yeah,
speaking of that, Jess, we're almost up for the hearing. So, you know what we're going to
that's
do,
right.
everybody? I'm sorry that we got such a late start. We are going to be back here on this channel at 1 p.m. Eastern time to wrap everything up. But for now, we're moving over to my Substack, Rasmussen Retorts at sub.substack.com. RASMUSSENRETORTS. I should have thought of a shorter name when I named my Substack, but I just felt I was being so clever. I forgot how many people also can't pronounce and also misspell my last name. There's no ass in Rasmussen. So everybody head over to RASMUSSENRETORTS.substack.com. And we're going to continue this conversation as we watch Casey come out and get probably grilled by all the Democrats and probably a free pass from all the Republicans. But I'll tell you one last thing that I'm going to be watching for, Jess. I'm going to see if Bill Cassidy, the person who is responsible for Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is also a board certified hepatologist, is going to ask
Yep.
Casey Means if she got her baby the birth dose of the hepatitis B vaccine.
That is my first focus too.
Yes. Well, let's get over there. I'll see
All
you.
right.
We'll
See you
see
all there.
everybody in rasmussenretorts.substack.com. Thank you to the Save America movement for hosting us. We are excited to be here with you today, and hopefully this will not be boring. I don't think it could be with us. Oh, well, whatever. I swear on the air anyways.